Something happened in the last few hours that almost everyone is going to misread. Iran just declared the Strait of Hormuz completely open for commercial shipping, and within minutes, Trump posted on Truth Social in capital letters, and I want you to hear the exact words. Iran has just announced that the strait is fully open and ready for full passage. Thank you. Thank you. The President of the United States, who spent 48 days bombing Iran, who imposed a naval blockade, who threatened to destroy Iranian civilization, looked at the world and said thank you to Iran. Let that sink in before the news cycle tells you what to think about it, because what you are about to hear from every major channel will be the exact opposite of what actually happened here. Every major news channel is going to frame this as an American victory. Trump forced Iran's hand. Maximum pressure worked. The blockade succeeded. That is the story you will hear on repeat today. I want to argue the exact opposite. What happened today is not an American victory. What happened today is Iran demonstrating for the entire world to see that it controls the terms of this situation. Not America, Iran. And understanding why Iran has that control and why America could never have forced it otherwise requires understanding something that China quietly built over the last decade, something Washington was not paying attention to. Let me walk you through this carefully, because once you understand the structure behind what just happened, you will never look at this conflict the same way again. Let me start with structure, because structure always tells you more than any single event. The question I want you to hold in your mind throughout this entire analysis is this: why could Iran open Hormuz today on its own terms, linked to Lebanon, with conditions attached, with a coordinated route it controls, with the American blockade still sitting on Iranian ports rather than on America's terms? America spent 48 days trying to force Iran to open Hormuz unconditionally. It launched the most intensive bombing campaign in the Middle East since the Gulf War. It imposed a naval blockade with over 10,000 personnel and 16 warships. It threatened to destroy Iran's power grid, its energy infrastructure, its remaining economic capacity. And yet today, Iran opened Hormuz when Iran chose to. Iran linked the opening to Lebanon. Iran kept a coordinated route. Iran kept the blockade on its own ports in American hands while framing its move as a diplomatic gesture, not a military surrender. Iran said, "Thank you for the Lebanon ceasefire, and we will open the strait in kind." America said, "Thank you," in capital letters. That is not how maximum pressure is supposed to end. That is not what "you can't control anything" spoken from the Pentagon podium by Secretary Hegseth is supposed to produce. So what structural force gave Iran the ability to do this on its own terms instead of America's terms? The answer is China. Not China in the headline sense, China in the structural, decade-long architectural sense that nobody in the Western press has been willing to examine honestly or consistently until right now. To understand what China built, I want to use a framework I call the survival infrastructure. The survival infrastructure is the set of systems a country builds before a crisis that allows it to absorb punishment during the crisis without collapsing. It is not military hardware. It is economic architecture. It is the financial plumbing that keeps a country alive when its enemies try to starve it. And China spent a decade building Iran's survival infrastructure specifically because China understood long before this war started that this exact crisis was coming. The design was deliberate, the execution was patient, and the result is what you saw play out today on the world stage. Let me break down exactly what this infrastructure looks like in practice, piece by piece. First, the oil payment system. China has been buying Iranian oil in Chinese yuan, not dollars, since the early years of American sanctions. This bypasses the SWIFT financial network entirely. SWIFT is the system that connects global banks and enables international dollar payments. American sanctions work by cutting countries off from SWIFT. If you cannot receive dollars, you cannot pay for imports, you cannot fund your military, and you cannot function as a modern economy. Iran should have been strangled years ago. It was not, because China built a parallel system that does not use dollars, a system where yuan flows directly from Chinese refineries to Iranian accounts through second-tier Chinese banks with zero exposure to American financial enforcement. America designed sanctions to cut Iran off. China handed Iran a door out. Second, the dark fleet. China has been operating what analysts call the shadow fleet for years. These are tankers that physically disable their automatic identification systems, the GPS transponders that tell satellite services where they are. They sail invisibly. They conduct ship-to-ship transfers in international waters, transferring Iranian crude onto vessels with different flags and different ownership structures before sailing to Chinese refineries. China's customs records show zero imports from Iran since 2022. And yet, China's recorded imports of Malaysian crude in 2025 reached 1.3 million barrels per day, more than double Malaysia's entire oil production. The oil was Iranian. The paperwork said Malaysian. America built sanctions to cut Iran's revenue. China built a logistics system that made those sanctions invisible on paper and irrelevant in practice. Third, the strategic reserve. China entered this war with approximately 1.2 billion barrels of crude oil in strategic storage accumulated over 2 years by purchasing Iranian and Russian sanctioned oil at heavily discounted prices. When the Strait of Hormuz closed and Brent crude spiked past $120 a barrel, China did not panic. Its market stayed stable, its refineries kept running, its factories kept producing. The IEA chief stood in front of cameras and said Europe had 6 weeks of jet fuel left. China had 4 months of supply cover sitting in warehouses. America calculated that closing Hormuz would create economic pain that would force Iran to negotiate. China had already neutralized that calculation before the war even began. The energy weapon landed on everyone except the country it was aimed at. This is the survival infrastructure. It is not a secret military alliance. It is not a formal defense pact. China never committed to defending Iran militarily. China never promised to fight America. China simply built a decade-long economic architecture around Iran that made Iran resistant to the specific kind of pressure America was going to apply. And when America applied that pressure, 48 days of bombing, a naval blockade, financial sanctions, and maximum pressure on every front, Iran survived. Not comfortably, not without damage. The central bank warned it could take 12 years to rebuild, but Iran survived well enough to choose when to open Hormuz and on what terms. And that single act of strategic agency is exactly what the survival infrastructure was designed to produce. Now, I want to be precise about something because it is important to understand exactly what China's role is and what it is not. China is not Iran's military ally. China did not fire a single shot. China did not send soldiers or warships. China did not openly defy the American blockade. When the Rich Starry, a Chinese-owned tanker, attempted to pass through the strait under a Malawian flag with a spoofed transponder, it turned back after American warnings. China has been careful throughout this entire war to stay below the threshold of direct military confrontation with the United States. What China is, and what it has been since long before this war, is Iran's economic insurer. The country that made sure that no matter how hard America pressed, Iran would retain enough oxygen to keep breathing and enough leverage to keep negotiating on its own terms. Let me bring this all together. America did not force Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz. Iran opened it when Iran decided to, linked to a condition Iran chose, the Lebanon ceasefire, on a route Iran controls. With an American blockade still in place on Iranian ports, Trump said, "Thank you." Stocks went up, oil went down, and everyone called it a victory. The correct reading is this: Iran was able to make that choice, able to choose the timing, the conditions, the framing, because China spent a decade building the economic infrastructure that kept Iran alive under the most intense American pressure it has ever faced. China's yuan payment systems, China's dark fleet logistics, China's strategic petroleum reserves, China's UN Security Council veto. These are the structural reasons that American maximum pressure produced damage, but not the outcome America needed. The Strait of Hormuz is 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. America deployed 16 warships and 10,000 personnel to control it, and it still had to say thank you when Iran decided to open it. That gap between America's deployed military power and its actual strategic outcome is China's work. Not through a single dramatic action, not through a declaration of war, but through a decade of quiet, patient, invisible economic architecture that America either did not see or chose not to take seriously. Every empire eventually faces the moment when it discovers that the rules of the game have changed while it was not paying attention. Rome discovered it in the Parthian Wars. Britain discovered it at Suez in 1956. America is discovering it today, and this time nobody fired a shot to make it happen. I want to leave you with one number. China's customs records show zero imports from Iran since 2022. And yet China's recorded imports of Malaysian crude in 2025 reached 1.3 million barrels per day, more than double Malaysia's entire oil production. That gap between what the records say and what actually moved is not a data error. It is a system China built, a system that kept Iran alive, a system that made today possible, a system that America, despite all its intelligence capabilities, its financial surveillance tools, and its secondary sanction threats, could not stop. That single statistic, 1.3 million barrels of oil that officially did not come from Iran but obviously did, is the entire story of this war compressed into one number. Everything else is detail. Watch the next round of negotiations carefully. Not for what Iran demands, watch for what China does not say. Because in this story, as in every great strategic shift in modern history, the most important actor is the one who says the least while building the most. If China built the infrastructure that made today possible, the real question is what else China has already built for the next crisis that America has not yet identified. Read the Asia Times analysis on China navigating the Hormuz situation. Read the Jerusalem Post on China's strategic petroleum reserve. Read what Wang Yi said to Aragchi before Iran opened the strait. And if this analysis changed how you see this story, share it with someone who is still watching the mainstream version, because the gap between those two readings is exactly where the truth lives. Subscribe if you want to keep finding it.